Hey folks, hope you all are doing well. I'm Karan Bandal from Econosite, your weekly wrap on economic news from India and around the world. So let's get started. CareEdge is a leading credit rating agency in India, and our first report is from CareEdge. COVID pandemic did bog down India's economy, but government's public spending and investment resulted in rebound in GFCF in financial year 2022, that is the last financial year. And GFCF stands for Gross Fixed Capital Formation. So what exactly is GFCF? It is a measure of net investment or asset creation. It includes land improvements, plant, machinery and equipment purchases, construction of roads, railways, private residential dwellings, commercial and industrial buildings, and so on. So, government's public spending during the pandemic created assets like these. According to CareEdge, if this capital expenditure comes in with its strong multiplier effect in the economy may grow at a higher rate for longer term since consumption, which makes up 60% of India's economy, can only provide a short term boost. Real quick, what is this multiplier effect related to government's capital expenditure? Say the government spends on building a road and decides to appoint a private contractor to build the road. In turn, the private contractor appoints workers and supervisors and also buys the equipment to build the road. Now, over time, the new recruits will get their salaries and then they will spend to meet their needs. Now, this way, the government spending leads to rise in spending of both private industry and households. According to the Finance Minister of India, every rupee spent by the government on capital creation adds 2.95 rupees to overall income. And that is the multiplier effect in the economy. Back to the CareEdge report. According to Rajani Sinha, chief economist at CareEdge, the state governments have also budgeted for a strong capex growth for financial year 2023, that is the current financial year. 21 states together have budgeted 6 lakh crore rupees for capex this fiscal year, 39% higher than last fiscal. Central government's capex budget for financial year 2023 is 7.5 lakh crore rupees, 25% higher than last year. Central government has already achieved capex of 2.1 lakh crore rupees in the first 4 months of this fiscal, that is April to July 2022. What they have managed to spend in the first 4 months of this fiscal is already 62.5% higher than last fiscal. And I'm sure opening up of the economy, availability of labor, somewhat easing of supply chain related issues, all of that must have helped in achieving this higher realization of capex so far this fiscal year. Digging deeper into central government's capex, roads and highways, railways, and defense are the top three investment areas. In April to July 2022 period, capital spending on railways jumped by 102.7% and capital spending on roads and highways jumped 66.8%. Majority of the capital expenditure was on these two sectors, making up 60% of the total expenditure. Analysts at CareEdge expect government schemes like National Monetization Pipeline, Gati Shakti and PLI, that is production linked incentives, to help in the recovery of capex cycle in the economy as well. Rajani Sinha also added that private sector had been deleveraging for the past few years, with capacity utilization exceeding 75%. Ground is set for a pickup in the investment cycle from the private sector also. Easing commodity prices, easing inflation is another factor that will support this upswing in the investment cycle. Now, the most critical aspect is, can we see a sustenance in the demand recovery that India is seeing? Next story is on a similar theme of asset creation. FDI is set to hit record $100 billion in financial year 2023, the government report states. According to Commerce and Industry Ministry, India is on track to draw foreign direct investment of as much as $100 billion in financial year 2023 on the back of economic reforms and greater ease of doing business. FDI inflows almost doubled since financial year 2015. FDI has flown in from 101 countries and into 57 sectors. The statement was issued on the completion of 8 years of Make in India initiative. Now, this is the data from ministry's website for FDI inflows during the last 10 plus years, and you can see a steady uptrend. Also, look at last two fiscal years. India has attracted more than $80 billion FDI back to back. So it is in the realm of possibility that India can soon hit $100 billion mark. I am I'm just not sure that it will be the case this fiscal year. According to ministry, the factors that have enabled an uptrend in FDI inflows: a liberal and transparent policy regime, most sectors allowing FDI under automatic route, reduction in compliance burden for the companies, and finally, overall boost to ease of doing business. Let's zoom in on ease of doing business. Now, this is according to World Bank Ranking 2020. In 2014, India was on 142nd position when it came to ease of doing business. And just in 5 years, in 2019, India jumped to 63rd spot. So that is a significant movement upwards when it comes to ease of doing business. However, analysts have cautioned that current external headwinds, including the recession in the US and the EU, fresh COVID outbreaks in China, and Russia Ukraine war, will weigh on the flows of FDIs globally, not just for India. Only those economies that can weather the external storm better than the most stand to gain. India is the only major nation that has a decent expansion forecast for the next year or two. So, India may be able to capitalize on that. We'll see. Look at this data from the IMF. It is projecting world output to grow by around 3%, both in 2022 and 23, with a slowdown globally next year. Now, among the advanced economies, only Spain is projected to grow by 2% or higher, both in 2022 and 23. Now, look at emerging market and developing economies. Of all the nations, only India is projected to grow by 6% or higher, both in 2022 and 23. I pulled this story since we talked about capital formation in the beginning. I think some part of these FDI inflows surely will end up increasing GFCF, gross fixed capital formation, or asset creation. And if India continues to attract higher and higher FDIs year on year, it will help in continuing creation of assets through private sector, not just through government's public spending. Next up, Apple begins making iPhone 14 in India, marking a big shift in its manufacturing strategy. Apple is looking to shift some of its production away from China. Apple's main iPhone assembler, Foxconn, is manufacturing the devices at its Sri Perumbudur factory on the outskirts of Chennai. Apple has been manufacturing iPhones in India since 2017, but usually those were older models. This time with iPhone 14, Apple is producing its latest model in India for the first time, so close to the launch of this device. Apple will not only sell India produced iPhones locally but will also export them to other global markets. Apple still relies heavily on China for the majority of iPhone production, and as we know, with China, they are still persisting with zero COVID policy, even as most of the world look to open their societies. As a result, this has disrupted production at factories across China where lockdowns take place and has highlighted some potential weaknesses in supply chain of Apple. So, according to JP Morgan analysts, Apple will move 5% of its global production for iPhone 14 to India by late 2022 and could also make 25% of all iPhones in India by 2025. To sum up this week's wrap, Government of India spent heavily on asset creation during the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021 instead of giving out cash directly to individuals to boost demand. This is expected to create a multiplier effect in the economy, thus produce relatively high economic growth in the longer term and in a global environment where every other major nation is either slowing down or is in a recession. Add to that consistent FDI inflows for the past 8 plus years and still continues to grow. This will only add to the GFCF, gross fixed capital formation, further aiding the multiplier effect in the economy. And as a result, we see visible improvements like higher end iPhones being assembled in India now. I hope you enjoyed this week's wrap. I will speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.